The silent observers. The stars burned differently in the Andorian sector. Where once peaceful trade routes connected dozens of thriving worlds, now only empty space remained. The Kethvar swarm had consumed everything in their path, leaving behind hollow planets stripped of all organic matter. For 47 years, they had swept across the galaxy like a plague of locusts, and no force had been able to stop them. In the Grand Assembly Hall of Nexus Prime, representatives from 7 major civilizations gathered in what many believed would be their final war council. The air was thick with desperation, and the acrid smell of fear from various alien species. Zexai, the scaled diplomat from the Thylorian Republic, stood before the holographic display showing the swarm's latest advance. His reptilian features were drawn with exhaustion. "The Kethvar have taken the Meridian systems," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of another billion lost souls. "Our combined fleets managed to evacuate only 30% of the population before the bioships arrived." Commander Vorth, representing the insectoid Chitani hives, clicked his mandibles in frustration. His compound eyes reflected the red warning lights that had become permanent fixtures in the council chamber. "Our warriors fought bravely, but their adaptive biology makes conventional weapons nearly useless. Every strategy we employ, they counter within cycles." The other delegates stirred uneasily. The Kethvar weren't just conquerors, they were evolution incarnate. Each encounter with enemy technology made them stronger, more resistant, more deadly. Their bioships could reshape themselves mid-battle, growing new weapons or armor as needed. Their ground forces adapted to any environment within hours. They were the perfect predator, and the galaxy was their prey. "What of the Terran sector?" asked Ambassador Krill of the Aquatic Delphine Confederation, her gills fluttering with anxiety. "The archives show an inhabited system there. Could they provide assistance?" A moment of uncomfortable silence fell over the assembly. The humans of Earth were legendary figures in galactic mythology, but most considered them extinct or irrelevant. The last official contact had been over 3 centuries ago, when their radio signals had simply stopped. Most assumed they had destroyed themselves in some primitive conflict or had simply faded into obscurity. Zexai's expression grew thoughtful. "The old records show they possessed unusual problem-solving abilities. Their species seemed to thrive on conflict and adaptation, but they were technologically primitive when last observed." "Primitive species don't survive galactic-scale threats," Vorth stated flatly. "If they still exist, they're likely cowering in their single system, praying the swarm doesn't notice them." Unknown to the assembled delegates, Earth had indeed noticed the galactic crisis. In fact, humanity had been watching, learning, and preparing for decades. Hidden monitoring stations throughout human space had tracked every major conflict, cataloged every species' strengths and weaknesses, and most importantly, studied the Kethvar threat with growing concern. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice, in a facility that officially didn't exist, Admiral Sarah Chen stood before a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. The hologram showed the inexorable advance of the Kethvar swarm in angry red, while friendly territories shrunk like melting ice. Her weathered face reflected years of military service, but her eyes held a sharpness that came from understanding what others missed. "How long before they reach the outer colonies?" she asked her aide, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. "At current expansion rates, 18 months until they hit our monitoring posts. 24 months until they reach Luna's orbit," came the grim reply. Chen nodded grimly. Humanity had hoped to remain hidden until they were ready for full galactic integration, but the Kethvar had forced their hand. The United Earth Defense Force had spent centuries developing technology in secret, learning from observed alien conflicts and building upon humanity's greatest strength: adaptability. "Ma'am," Rodriguez continued, "we've intercepted another distress signal from the coalition forces. This one's different, though. It's specifically asking for any surviving species to render aid." The signal had originated from a damaged Thylorian vessel, its diplomat broadcasting on all known frequencies as his ship died around him. Zexay's voice, though the humans didn't yet know his name, carried a desperation that transcended species barriers. To any who can hear this message, the translation programs rendered his words into perfect English. The Kethvar swarm threatens all organic life in the galaxy. We have fought for decades, but our combined might is insufficient. If any species possesses weapons or knowledge that could aid us, we beg you to act. Time is running short, and soon there will be nothing left to save. Admiral Chen studied the tactical reports her analysts had compiled over decades of observation. The alien coalition forces were competent but predictable. They relied on superior firepower and defensive formations, exactly the kind of conventional warfare the Kethvar had evolved to counter. What they needed wasn't more of the same, but something completely different. "Prepare the 7th Fleet," she ordered. "Full stealth configuration. We're going to make contact." The preparation took 6 days. 6 days while another star system fell to the swarm. 6 days while millions of alien civilians died or were consumed. But when the human fleet finally departed Earth's hidden shipyards, they brought with them technology that would reshape the galactic balance of power. The human ships were unlike anything in the galaxy's databases. Instead of the sleek, elegant designs favored by most species, or the organic curves of biotechnology, human vessels looked almost industrial. They were angular, practical, and covered in sensor arrays and weapon systems that defied easy classification. Most importantly, they were completely undetectable to conventional scanners. The first sign of humanity's intervention came during the Battle of Kepler Station. Coalition forces had made their stand around the massive trading post, hoping its defensive platforms could slow the Kethvar advance. The battle had been raging for 12 hours, and defeat seemed inevitable. Bioships swarmed around the station like angry insects, their living weapons tearing through metal and energy shields alike. Commander Vorth watched from his flagship as another section of the station's outer ring was consumed by Kethvar digestive acids. His warriors had fought bravely, but bravery meant nothing against an enemy that grew stronger with every casualty they inflicted. "Sir," his communications officer clicked urgently, "we're detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the system's edge. Configuration unknown. Reinforcements." Vorth's hopes rose momentarily, then crashed as he considered which coalition forces were even left to send. "Negative, sir. These signatures don't match any known propulsion systems. They're not using traditional FTL at all." The human fleet decloaked simultaneously across 1,000 cubic kilometers of space. 12 vessels materialized where sensors had detected nothing moments before. They were smaller than most coalition warships, but radiated an aura of barely contained power that made veteran warriors pause. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the tactical display update in real time. Her crew worked with quiet efficiency, the product of generations of military evolution. Unlike alien species that had developed warfare alongside their technology, humanity had refined conflict into an art form before they ever left their home planet. "Tactical analysis complete," reported Commander Hayes, her tactical officer. "Kethvar bioships are adapting to coalition weapons as expected. Energy absorption rate increasing by 12% every minute of engagement. Then we'll give them something new to adapt to," Chen replied. "All ships, initiate Protocol 7. Target the largest bioships first. Let's see how they handle a little human ingenuity." The human weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of energy beams or kinetic projectiles, they fired what appeared to be small metallic spheres. The spheres seemed laughably primitive compared to the exotic weapons both sides had been employing. The Kethvar bioships barely registered them as threats. That changed when the first sphere made contact with a Kethvar destroyer. Instead of exploding or releasing energy, it simply multiplied. The spheres split into dozens of smaller copies, each one boring into the bioship's living hull. Within seconds, the tiny machines had spread throughout the vessel's organic structure, but instead of destroying it, They began transmitting data. "What are those things?" Commander Vorth demanded, watching the impossible scene unfold. Dr. Marcus Webb, monitoring the battle from Earth, smiled as he watched his creation work. "Adaptive reconnaissance nanobots," he explained to his research team. "They're not weapons in the traditional sense. They're learning machines. Every second they remain in contact with Kethvar biomatter, they're analyzing, cataloging, and transmitting biological data back to our fleet." The genius of the human approach became clear within minutes. While the Kethvar ships attempted to adapt to what they perceived as a nanite attack, the human nanobots were actually mapping their entire biological structure. Every adaptation, every evolutionary response, every biological function was being recorded and analyzed by human computers that had been designed specifically for this purpose. Phase 2, Admiral Chen ordered. The second wave of human weapons was even more devastating. Now armed with complete biological profiles of their enemies, the human fleet fired what appeared to be standard plasma torpedoes. But these weapons had been precisely calibrated based on the nanobots' reconnaissance data. Instead of the random damage pattern of conventional weapons, they struck at specific biological weak points that the Kethvar couldn't adapt to protect. The effect was immediate and shocking. Bioships that had shrugged off coalition firepower for hours began dying in seconds. Their adaptive biology, their greatest strength, had become a liability when facing an enemy that could map and exploit their weaknesses faster than they could evolve new defenses. But the humans weren't finished. As Kethvar reinforcements arrived, expecting to face the same ineffective coalition tactics, they instead encountered something that would haunt their species' collective memory: human psychological warfare. The tide turns. The Kethvar swarm had never experienced fear. As a collective consciousness spread across billions of bioships and trillions of individual organisms, they knew only hunger, growth, and the inexorable drive to consume. Fear was an individual emotion, and they had evolved beyond such weaknesses, until they encountered humanity. Admiral Chen watched the tactical display as more Kethvar reinforcements poured into the Kepler system. The bioships moved with their characteristic swarming patterns, each vessel perfectly coordinated with the others. It was an impressive sight that had terrorized the galaxy for decades. To human eyes, it looked like a puzzle waiting to be solved. "They're trying to surround us," observed Commander Hayes. "Classic swarm tactics. Overwhelming numbers, multiple attack vectors." "Let them," Chen replied calmly. "Execute Stratagem Delta. Time to show them why humans invented guerrilla warfare." The human fleet split apart in a maneuver that violated every conventional tactical doctrine. Instead of maintaining formation for mutual support, each ship accelerated in a different direction, seemingly abandoning their comrades to face the swarm alone. To the watching coalition forces, it looked like cowardice or madness. Commander Vorth's mandibles clicked in dismay. The humans are retreating. They're abandoning the battle. But Zexhai, who had been studying the human tactics more carefully, wasn't so sure. "Wait," he hissed thoughtfully. "Look at their trajectories. They're not fleeing the system. They're spreading out." The Kethvar Queen Mind, controlling the swarm from her massive bioship at the fleet's center, felt something she had never experienced before: confusion. The new enemy had demonstrated devastating weapons, but now they were scattering like frightened prey. It made no tactical sense. What the Queen Mind couldn't understand was that humans had spent millennia fighting enemies more numerous than themselves. From ancient tribal warfare to modern asymmetric conflicts, humanity had learned that sometimes the best way to defeat a swarm was not to fight it as a swarm. The first human ship, the UES Relentless, had positioned itself near a cluster of asteroids. As Kethvar bioships moved to intercept it, Captain Morrison initiated a tactic that would have been impossible for any other species to execute successfully. The Relentless began broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously, each transmission containing different data patterns. To the coalition forces monitoring communications, it sounded like chaos. But to the human ships spread throughout the system, It was a complex musical score, each note containing tactical information. Within seconds, all 12 human vessels began moving in perfect coordination, despite being separated by millions of kilometers. The Kethvar bioships, following their instinctive swarming behavior, converged on the nearest human vessel. They found themselves flying into carefully laid traps, mines that had been deployed along predictable approach routes, concealed weapon platforms that emerged from asteroid cover, and most devastating of all, human ships that appeared exactly where the swarm wasn't expecting them. But the real psychological warfare was just beginning. Dr. Webb had spent decades studying not just Kethvar biology, but their behavioral patterns. He had noticed something that the galaxy's military commanders had missed. The swarm's greatest strength was also a critical vulnerability. Initiate the disruption protocol, Admiral Chen ordered. Human ships began broadcasting a specific frequency that did no physical damage to the bioships. Instead, it interfered with the quantum entanglement patterns the Kethvar used for their collective consciousness. For the first time in their species' existence, individual Kethvar organisms found themselves alone. The effect was catastrophic. Bioships that had moved with perfect coordination suddenly began making individual decisions. Some froze in space, paralyzed by the unfamiliar sensation of independent thought. Others began attacking their own kind, no longer able to distinguish friend from foe without the collective's guidance. The Queen Mind screamed across the psychic networks, a sound of pure rage and terror that made every Kethvar organism in the system writhe in sympathetic agony. Never had the collective been so thoroughly disrupted. These humans didn't just fight with weapons, they fought with understanding. Commander Vorth watched the impossible scene unfold. "How?" he whispered. "How did they know?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Webb's voice reached the Coalition fleet through a communication array that shouldn't have existed. For the first time, humanity was speaking directly to the galaxy. "Because we've been watching," came the calm, measured voice from Earth. "For 3 centuries, we've observed, analyzed, and learned. We saw how the Kethvar operated, how they adapted, how they thought. And we did what humans do best. We found a solution." The battle at Kepler Station ended not with a glorious charge or devastating weapon, but with the Kethvar fleet simply leaving. The remaining bioships, still reeling from their psychic disruption, retreated to regroup and report to their queen. They had encountered something beyond their evolutionary experience, a species that fought with pure intellect rather than brute force. In the aftermath, Coalition representatives found themselves face to face with humanity for the first time in centuries. Admiral Chen materialized on the bridge of Commander Vorth's flagship via holographic projection, and the assembled alien leaders got their first good look at the species that had just changed the course of galactic history. She was smaller than most of the aliens present, as humans generally were, but there was something in her eyes, a quality that Zexhai would later describe as predatory intelligence, that made even veteran warriors uncomfortable. This was a species that had evolved not just to survive, but to dominate through adaptation and cunning. Representatives of the Coalition, Chen began formally. "Earth extends greetings and offers our assistance in resolving the Kethvar crisis." "Your assistance?" Commander Vorth's translator struggled with his species' equivalent of incredulous laughter. "You just demonstrated capabilities that surpass our combined fleets." Chen smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both reassuring and unsettling. "We've had time to prepare. 3 centuries of watching and learning while the galaxy assumed we were primitive or extinct. We used that time well." The revelation that humanity had been secretly observing galactic civilization sent shockwaves through the Coalition. How much did they know? What other technologies had they developed? Most importantly, what did they want? "Our terms are simple," Chen continued. "Full integration into galactic civilization as equals, not subjects. Access to scientific and cultural exchange programs. And a united front against the Kethvar, until they're no longer a threat to organic life. HFY, still processing what he had witnessed, spoke for the coalition. And in return, we'll show you how to win this war. The campaign that followed would be studied in military academies for millennia. Human tactical doctrine, refined through centuries of theoretical development and enhanced by detailed knowledge of HFY biology, proved devastatingly effective. Where alien forces had relied on superior firepower, humans employed superior intelligence. Every major engagement followed the same pattern. Human reconnaissance would identify HFY weaknesses, human psychological warfare would disrupt their coordination, and human weapons would exploit the vulnerabilities that centuries of evolution had never prepared them for. The swarm, which had consumed systems for decades, found itself being systematically dismantled by an enemy that refused to fight on their terms. The final battle took place at the HFY homeworld, a massive bioplanet that served as both fortress and nursery for their species. Coalition fleets, now integrated with human tactical support, surrounded the world in a formation that would have been impossible without human coordination protocols. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching as the planet's biodefenses activated. Massive organic weapons emerged from the surface, each one capable of destroying a conventional fleet. But the humans had prepared for this moment. "Execute final protocol," she ordered. The weapon that struck the HFY homeworld wasn't explosive or energetic. It was biological, a virus specifically designed to target the quantum structures that enabled their collective consciousness. Developed from the reconnaissance data gathered in dozens of previous battles, it spread through their bionetworks like wildfire. The effect wasn't death, but something the HFY considered worse: individuality. Across the homeworld, billions of organisms suddenly found themselves alone in their own minds, capable of independent thought for the first time in their species' history. The war ended not with the destruction of the HFY, but with their transformation. Cut off from their collective consciousness, many individual organisms chose peace over conflict. They began to form smaller communities, learning to cooperate without the oppressive unity of the swarm. Some even requested asylum in coalition space, seeking to understand the individual identity they had been denied. In the aftermath of victory, the galaxy found itself fundamentally changed. Humanity had not only ended the greatest threat in galactic history, but had done so in a way that preserved rather than destroyed their enemies. It was a demonstration of power tempered by wisdom that impressed even the most skeptical alien observers. The formal induction of Earth into the Galactic Coalition took place 1 year later. Admiral Chen, now promoted to the newly created position of Galactic Defense Coordinator, addressed representatives from across known space. "The humans have shown us something profound," HFY observed in his opening remarks. "They proved that the greatest weapon isn't the one that destroys enemies, but the one that transforms them into something better." But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed conflict itself. Human military doctrine, with its emphasis on understanding enemies rather than simply defeating them, became the new standard for civilized warfare. The age of mutual annihilation was ending, replaced by an era of what humans called constructive conflict resolution. As Admiral Chen concluded her address to the assembled representatives, she left them with words that would define humanity's role in galactic civilization. "We didn't come to conquer or rule. We came to solve problems. And there are always more problems that need solving." The galaxy had gained not just a new member, but a new way of thinking about conflict, cooperation, and the potential for transformation. In the years that followed, human advisors would help resolve dozens of smaller conflicts, always with the same principle: understanding leads to solutions, and solutions last longer than victories. The HFY crisis had ended, but humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization was just beginning.